Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first in a series of webinars focused on teaching with the arts during the pandemic. We hope you'll find this webinar useful. I'm Rebecca Edwards, and I work as an education specialist for teacher programs in the Getty Museum's Education Department. In the last 6 months, since we all went remote at the Getty, the Education Department staff have been experimenting with virtual art experiences with our local K-12 audiences, who would have otherwise been visiting us for in-person field trips. Those experiences teaching have given us a window into strategies that we can use when we're teaching remotely. And we've experimented with bringing a variety of strategies into the digital universe. We designed this webinar program so that we could share out some of the things that we've recently learned. As we developed the content for the webinar, we focused on general classroom teachers, and we really wanted to make sure that what we're sharing is useful for everyone across grades and subject areas. So we hope that you'll all find something useful no matter what your teaching role is. I'd like to take a minute to bring your attention to the Q&A window. Take a moment to notice where that is on your Zoom app or on your computer. We'll be using the Q&A window to take your questions for the presenter, and we'll make sure to leave time at the end of the webinar to answer as many as we have time for. Feel free during the webinar to answer your questions, but please know we'll be saving time at the end to answer them. Before we get started, I thought it would be helpful to know who's here with us. So I thought we'd launch a poll to give us an idea. So if you could take a moment and answer these 2 questions in the poll, that would be amazing. Here it is. Okay, it's looking like about 80% of you have responded. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay. Looks like most of you have answered. So let's end the poll and see who's here. So it looks like we have a pretty diverse group of teachers and a few people who aren't teachers. So glad that you could also join us. And several visual arts teachers, but a lot of teachers from other subject areas as well. So we hope that all of you will find something useful. Okay. So while we're at it, we like to get to know you just a little bit. We only have an hour, so there's a limit to how far we can go, but I thought we could just do one short poll to get to know you a little bit. So if you could take a moment, we have one more poll for you to get to know each other just a little bit. Here it is. Okay, we have almost everybody has replied. I'll leave it open for just a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. If you'd like to see how you fit in with this group, here's what we have. Well, I'm a dog lover too, but it looks like we have several cat lover, and I wish I could know what the another pet is. Okay, so thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself. So I'd like to get started more seriously now by introducing our main presenter today. Her name is Darcy Beeman Black. And Darcy has been with the Getty Museum for about 1.5 years, and she's worked closely on the Getty's teacher programs team. She's worked with us on conducting teacher workshops, curriculum development, And she's also taught almost 5 classes a week with our virtual K-12 classroom program, which started in the summer. Previously, she was the Youth Initiative Coordinator at the Metal Museum in Memphis, and also a community art teacher for the Memphis College of Art. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand our virtual floor over to Darcy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm really excited to share some of the things that we've learned through our virtual art sessions, and then also have some fun in the process. So first, let's just dive right in. Let's see what we're gonna do. I'll show you the agenda. So we did introductions. I feel like I at least know that this group is mostly dog people. I'm actually a cat person, but that's okay. First I'm going to go over some of the goals of the session, just kind of an overview of how we came about these activities and how they were developed. And then I'm also going to talk about some strategies that you'll find in all of these activities. And then the bulk of our session today is going to be used with me sharing activity examples with you. And you're going to get to meet some of my students and see how they carried out some of them. And then, of course, we have our Q&A at the end. Rebecca already explained, but in case you missed it, there is a Q&A box at the bottom that you can use to ask questions. Okay, so today we're going to share art-based activities that are quick and easy to set up. I'm not trying to make more work for any of you. Are flexible to use across multiple grades. So I saw that we have a pretty diverse set of teachers with us today. And so I want to make sure there's a little something for everyone. So across multiple ages and subject areas. Also, activities that use minimal materials. I understand that students have varying access to different things. So there's not a lot of call for materials in any of these activities. And then also activities that build a sense of community in the classroom. And I'm going to get into that in the next slide. But that is something obviously we thought about when we were putting this webinar together for you today. And then also these activities can be customized to fit your class. So I understand that, you know, class culture is different for everyone. Sometimes you may want to shift a little bit to have something match what your students need. So hopefully these activities will meet those for you. All right, so to build community in the virtual classroom, we strive to spark digital connections. In this situation, we're going to be looking at ways to do that in Zoom, but you could do that in other platforms as well. I know some of you may use Google or other ones. And then we also strive to facilitate exchange of ideas. So we didn't want these activities to be one way. We wanted it to be something that multiple students could contribute to and learn from each other. Strengthen peer relationships. This time has been very isolating. I know for me, I always get excited when I have a chance to talk to someone else or connect with someone else. So that's something that we also thought about when putting these together. And then empowering student voice. So I know for me in this platform, it was hard to get used to interpreting the feedback from students and making sure that no one felt left out. So a lot of these activities you'll find allow for multiple students to respond at the same time or allow for everyone to be involved. All right, and then for the types of strategies, you'll see here that I will get into each one in the following slides, but I do want to say that all of these can be used to build community, promote creative thinking or creativity, and then also can be used in various approaches. So you can apply them to multiple subjects or multiple areas or multiple ages. And then I'll go into a little bit more of that in the next slide. So we're going to start with group imaginative play. So you'll notice the word group there. All of these strategies really strive to include the group in creating or creative thinking. And so I'm going to show you a few examples of activities that use group imaginative play. So the first one is step into a work of art. So this would involve showing a piece of work to your students or an image, and then really have them imagine or use their imagination to step inside this piece. So things, this piece in particular, you could imagine that you're inside of the painting. You could ask questions of how are you positioned? What are you holding? What are you hearing? Really tapping into those senses. So you'll notice that this painting is, it's of a celebration. So there's instruments and it's really loud and busy and there's crowds of people. But you don't always have to use imagery like that. Like this one, it's a calm landscape, right? So where would you be sitting in this landscape? What would you be looking at? And then you can also take it to a protest. Imagine you are walking with this group of people. What would your sign say if you had a sign? This could also connect to curriculum. So you could choose moments in history to connect to, to use your imagination to imagine you were there. It's also a way to create empathy. And then there's, of course, the weather. So how would you feel if you were sitting in this painting? Would you be wearing a jacket? Would you be shivering? Where is the sun? How does that ground feel? So the next activity sort of builds on that one, and it is dance along with art. So I have 3 examples here. I have 2 photographs of people dancing, but then I also show, an artifact that maybe if you're a middle school teacher or something like that, and there's people dancing maybe in a more abstract way, not in a photograph, you could still play music from that time. I'll show you, I found some music for this piece of work. This is called Jitterbugging at the Juke Joint on Saturday Night. And so you're going to get to meet my students here in a second. And what we did is I showed them that piece of work and I had them imagine that they were dancing with the people in the photograph. And I started playing music.
Now, if you like to be a jitterbug, first thing you do, get yourself a jug, put whiskey, wine, and gin.
So you'll notice that they all started dancing at the same time. I did build them up to it, but it's a way for them to really lose themselves and, use their power of imagination to step inside of a work of art. So another example of imaginative play, and I do realize, I do want to point out that some of these work well for maybe lower elementary or elementary students. I understand that. So if you teach older grades, stay tuned. We do have stuff throughout the presentation for those people too. So so here, this activity, Soundscape Ensemble. For this one, you basically take, your step inside of work of art, but I want to know more about the sounds and really focus on that. So you'll see these 3 examples of images you could use. So you would see the single lion. You could prompt your students just to make lion sounds on the count of 3. Or in the entry of animals into Noah's Ark, there's many animals to look at. And I'll show you an example of what my students did here in a minute. Or there's also the rain. You could clap your hands, you could rub your hands together, you could snap if you wanted to try to create a soundtrack for that work of art. So here is the work of art I shared with my students, and I wanted them to pick an animal, and then you'll hear me count off. Oh, you'll hear me count off, and they start making the sounds of their favorite animal. Oh. All right, so I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Squawk, squawk, squawk,
Nay.
squawk,
Nay.
squawk, 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 squawk,
Awesome.
Polly wants a cracker.
Okay, so I love the Polly wants a cracker at the end. So one good thing, and I'll go over this a little bit later, but one good thing about this activity is if you have a hard time kind of winding the students down, you can pause them individually, slowly. And so your voice will start breaking through the loud noises of the animals. Okay, so our next strategy I'm going to talk about is real-time exchange of ideas. So one silver lining in using the Zoom platform that I've noticed is that I can ask a question to students and get simultaneous answers from every student who's in the room if they choose to answer. And then that allows me to look through those answers and drive my teaching based on what their feedback was or what their thoughts are. So one example of an activity you can do is caption this chat storm. And basically I just put an image up, I put a thought bubble next to the man in the image, and I said, I really want to know what this man is thinking. You know, if you walked into a room full of animals, what would you think? And what would you say? And so you can see that I got some various answers. But one thing I like about this is if you look at Anna's answer, you know, she says, why are owls singing? Do I know this song? Well, that tells me that she thinks those owls are singing. And then that opens up a whole conversation of why does she think the owls are singing? What about this image made her think that? And then that drives your interpretation of this image. But I was able to get a lot of answers at the same time. And then students can also read the answers of their peers in live time. All right, so let's talk about communal creativity. So this section is really about making art and sharing expressions with each other in the Zoom platform or any other platform like Google or any other ones you use. So the first one is the Zoom Art Gallery, and this one really thinks about the Zoom windows. If you're in gallery view in Zoom where you can see all of your students' faces, thinking about each one of those windows as a gallery space. So for this activity example with my students, we did a drawing activity before we went into a gallery show. And I had them hold up all of their stuff at the count of 3. And you can see that it's not perfect, but they all were able to see what the other one drew. There's 2 ways to think about this. You could do this as a temporary presentation where they all just kind of one and done, or you could do it in a way where you take a screenshot as I've done here, and then you can share it at a later date. And there are other ways. You don't have to do a drawing activity with your students necessarily to do this activity. You could also share drawings that you've already assigned from a homework assignment. You could use your body or your face as the art. So do a facial expressions, a gallery of emotions, or use your body as sculpture. And then also collaborative cityscapes is another activity. So what I did here is I put a horizon line down at the bottom, and I invited students by enabling annotation for all to keep adding to that horizon line a building of their choice. And I'm going to show you an example from my students and what they did. And you'll notice I put the horizon at the bottom, and then I start drawing, and they were actually a little timid at first. But then they start building. You'll notice they start adding on top. And then I started noticing they were adding on top of each other, but then they started adding texture to each other's buildings. And it kept going from there. But other riffs on this activity include you could collaboratively draw a tesseract with your students, or you could draw scenes from books and classes or scenes in history. You could also draw street for those art teachers out there. You could utilize 2-point and 3-point perspective by adding more than just the horizon line. You could add points also for them to use. And then another example of an activity is found object still life. So this is basically using the gallery view in Zoom, but for this, instead of work that the students have created, you're using found objects or objects that the students choose. So this example shows this prompt was find an animal to show in the Zoom window. And I do want you to notice that they're not all actual stuffed animals or animal sculptures. There's also the scrunchie that has the animal print, and then one student didn't have an animal, so they drew one to add so that everyone was included. And then we also have games. We don't want to leave those out. So there's a lot of ways there's a lot of games out there to play online, but these two in particular, you can use in Zoom. They're really easy to set up. I'm going to show you an example of Zoom Pictionary. So I'll show you the setup. So you enable whiteboard and annotation for everyone. And then you can see that I'm sending a personal message of the word that they're going to draw. And then they start drawing, and then you can choose to have your students unmute and say what they think the drawing is, or you can utilize chat, which you'll see here. Danica, she guessed apple. And so then I signal to everybody by saying or by typing. And then I send Danica her word for her to start using, and then it keeps going from there. And then I also included over here what it looks like for Joshua, who is on the other side of that. And so you can see the annotation tools are there too. All right, so contained chaos. So this one is one of my favorites because I really like the idea of letting students kind of lose control and go crazy and break out of the traditional etiquette of the classroom or Zoom etiquette. This idea allows students to all be unmuted and all have annotation abilities. And basically the prompt is dogs or cats, and they can mark it up. They can say what their opinion is, and you'll see this is the end result of what my students came up with. And I really can't tell dogs or cats by this image, but I can tell that there was dialogue happening and exchange of ideas during it. But you could also connect this to the curriculum. So you could have historical figures and you have your students do the same activity, but they're looking at, people from history and deciding their opinion on something. And then last but not least, I do want to talk about humor. I think humor is really important during this time. Whenever we have a chance to laugh together, I think it's always really important to connect and to, find those moments of happiness during stressful times. And so some examples of moments of humor that you could find within the activities I already showed you are, you can caption this chat storm. There's always going to be, a silly contribution. And so highlighting that one or spending some time to really laugh about something, I think could be helpful. And then annotate your vote. Would you rather, something silly? And I'll show you an example of one of those here in a minute. For the still life, the Zoom still life activity, you could only do silly faces. If you want to step into a painting, it could be a surrealist painting, it could be an abstract painting. You could really add an unexpected element that adds humor to any of the activities that I presented. And then here's an example of an activity you could do that would be a little silly for your students, and maybe would you rather wear a bicycle bird costume or a spiral ballet costume? And you could have your students annotate that and see what funny things come out of it. And so I just want to reshare this slide with all the types of strategies, and I want to reiterate that a lot of the activities that I shared with you today utilize many of these strategies at the same time, or multiple ones. For example, the animal soundscape, it was group imaginative play, but it also had some contained chaos in there because I was unleashing everyone's ability to add their contribution at the same time. And so I think that a lot of these are going to be interchangeable, and you can find moments in all of the activities where these strategies were being used. And my hope is that I was only able to show you a couple of activities today, but I hope that many of you continue this work with your students and try out some of these strategies and see what you come up with. I also want to add that we didn't talk about the Getty Art Challenge today because our next webinar is all about the Getty Art Challenge. And so I hope that many of you join us and are able to learn more about how teachers are using that in their classrooms. And that is all I have to share with you today. And I am going to move on to the Q&A slide and invite Rebecca back.
Hi.
All right.
Hi. Right. So thank you for that, Darcy. Thank you everybody who has been submitting questions in our Q&A panel. I'm going to take a look at them and we will try and answer some of them. There's one question that's come up from a lot of people, so I thought I would just go ahead and answer it all at one time. Yes, we will be sharing the slide deck out to a link to the slide deck. We're going to put it on Google Drive to everybody who attended today. Additionally, we will include a list of the images that the art objects that were included in the activity ideas. And we'll also include links to where on the Getty website you can download them for your own use. We also encourage you, you're welcome to find other objects, other works of art that might work better for your particular students or fit more with your curriculum, also on our website, and all of them are available to download for free at high resolution, so it can easily be incorporated into any slideshow that you put together. So that covers several of the images, several of the questions rather that we were asked. We had one question which had to do with how do we handle inappropriate use of the whiteboard or annotation features, and what are some approaches for managing that? So Darcy, I'm going to leave that question for you to answer.
Yeah. So there's a couple of levels. So during the annotation, you have the ability to see who's drawing what. So on each mark, you'll see that there's a student's name that comes up as a little box. If you run your mouse over it, it'll show that. So that's one way that you can at least identify who's doing it, and then you can address it with that person specifically. There are ways to kind of put someone in timeout in Zoom and stop them from being able to engage anymore if it comes to that. It really depends on the level. So I will admit, like when I was working with students on it, the longer it went, the more stacked all of these images would get, and it kind of reached this critical mass of, okay, we've kind of reached the end of the chaos, and so I just ended it for everyone. But you have the ability to stop and start annotation abilities for students. And whether you want to send a private chat to a student saying, hey, I see what you're doing there, or whether you call it out in front of everybody. I think that's really up to you and how your students are. But yeah, you are able to stop the annotation from happening if it gets out of control.
Thanks, Darcy. So there's another question. Could you call out some of the activities that you think would work particularly well for older middle and high school students among this group?
Yes, so I think the collaborative drawing would work really well with older students. I think that with younger students, which are the ones I worked with, they were just kind of like, I'm going to draw wherever. But if you had older students and you wanted to really draw a scene in history, you could do that. I think the step into a piece of artwork with the protest, you could take that. I know that that's in the high school curriculum to learn about American history and civics. I think, honestly, all of them could be changed up to work with older grades. I just know that the imaginative play ones are the ones where you're asking uncomfortable movement, body movement, and things like that. But I will say meme culture out there is much like captioning images. So you could also tap into that with the older kids.
Darcy, also along those lines, there's a question about whether any of the activities that involve kind of physical activity might successfully be used with high school students.
So I've done in-person activities with adults where we had to move around and dance together. And I think it really depends on your group that you're working with. Like I know some high school students I've worked with, like, no way, I wouldn't be able to get them to do it. But then I've also worked with other students who they have, there's opportunity there to push them out of their comfort zone.
So there's a lot of curiosity about the annotation. So we still have a few more questions about annotation.
Okay.
Another question had to do with classroom size or the number of students within a Zoom meeting. Do you find that there is a kind of a maximum number of students that would work with the annotation activities? Is there a point at which it becomes too many students?
Well, I think maybe annotate your vote would be one that would work with larger groups. And whether or not you wanted to have the sound on for that would be another, maybe that one would be a silent one and they're only using annotation during that activity. I think that would work really well with older students. With the create a mural, that could work with a larger group of students if you assigned real estate on a photograph. And, then there's really no limit to how many students could work at the same time.
So there's an interesting question that builds on some work we did a long time ago here, which had to do with whether you can use any of these strategies for student assessment. Do you have thoughts about that? Would you like me to share some of my thoughts?
Why don't you start and then I'll add.
Well, so one of the things that we've worked with teachers doing in the past is using different forms of self-expression and artistic tools for sharing what they've learned. So not necessarily requiring just the, filling out a worksheet or writing some sentences about what they've learned, but giving them opportunities to share what they've learned using alternative strategies like drawing. So that's where something like doing a temporary Zoom art gallery could work. And then you have an opportunity to look more closely at the drawings that the students made or even discuss it with them. Other activities like the one that Darcy was showing where it was a vote but also a debate about which of those two rulers were more just. That's an opportunity for students to have a debate. It's the starting point for a debate that they could use to build and express their learning about what you might have been studying about a character in an English language arts book, or a famous person from history that you've been studying. So there are ways that you can build these strategies into your assessment. Those are some examples. There's another question, Darcy, that's coming up. Or did you have more that you'd like to comment on about assessment?
Well, I was also thinking about the caption this, or, you know, the other ones where you can use chat, the chain stories. You could put like a moment in history up and see what students think before and after learning about the event. That would be a way that you could utilize that.
Okay, so Darcy, we have a question. We have several questions around the same topic, which I know you've touched on a bit, but I think would be useful for you to flesh out, which has to do with all the different platforms and technology that different students are using, whether they're on iPads or Android tablets or Chromebooks or laptops or even phones. Could you talk a little bit about what the limitations are and which of these activities work across devices, which of these activities need modification?
Yeah, so annotation is not available on Chromebooks. So that's something that you would need to keep in mind if you were wanting to do any of those activities with students that have Chromebooks. There are alternatives. You could use Google Docs, a Google Doc that everyone has access to, and screen share that in Zoom and have everybody contribute that way. As far as mobile devices, I actually was thinking about how there's opportunity in the fact that a phone is mobile. So maybe part of an imaginative play would be, you know, dancing with your phone or taking your phone somewhere in your house to, you know, feel the same way as the painting you're jumping into. But yeah, the big one is the annotation tools. That is something that does not work on Google Chrome.
What about in breakout rooms? Do you know what is available in a breakout room?
I think the same things would be available in a breakout room. So your annotation is available. If you have it on your device, it would be available there. But you can set up different settings in your Zoom preferences.
So thank you everybody for all your questions. I'm making my way through them and trying to group together like questions. There was also a comment that I thank you for to the person who shared it, that annotations in Zoom, you could also use other platforms like Google Jamboard. So every school and school district is using different platforms and tools, but you can find similar platforms that you can use to accomplish the same type of activity. So what about, here's a question that Darcy and I have, and many of the educators at the Getty Museum have struggled with a lot and talked about a lot. What do you do? How do you involve older students who like to keep their video off? Which of these activities can we use for those students, even with their cameras off?
Yeah, so I have leaned on the chat box a lot for those students and really tried to get their collective feedback that way. So any of the activities that we had that utilized the chat box heavily, you could also utilize the sound ensembles, but it could be something, you know, like an older image, you know, or you could also have them look at maybe, you know, I still think of the protest, you know, what would they be saying? What would it sound like? And then they're really only saying, you know, a statement or a word. They don't have to be visible.
All right. So Another question, Darcy, is about modifications for different kinds of learners, whether it's special needs students or students who have special accommodations in the classroom. What are some ways to tweak some of these activities for students with different learning styles and needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a tough question in general because you are limited to the tools in Zoom. So I would say utilizing being, if it's a group of students that, they need to see each other, or, I try to equate it to what tool is using what aspect from the other students. So, if they aren't able to type, I'm not going to use activities where they need to type. I'm going to lean on ones where I'm speaking with them, or that I'm talking with them, or showing them things on the screen. But I would say in general, it is really hard to gauge that all the time because you are limited to the little computer screen or the little device screen.
Okay. Oh, there were some suggestions by participants that I'd like to share. So one of them was that you could also turn some of these projects into different backgrounds for their Zoom and make it into a new art project, or have them create backgrounds for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a question of so there was a question, there's a few questions about what's available on our website. So I'll answer that just kind of broadly. The Getty website has 2 decades worth of lesson plans and curriculum resources that have been generated over the years. And they are searchable by grade and a little bit by topic. So if you're looking for other types of curriculum resources that build on the arts, and specifically art in collection areas within the Getty's collection, you can find all of that on our website. And you can search it by age, less so by subject, but there are some keyword searches you can do. And then similarly, our website also has a huge online database of digital images, mostly from our collection. And not everything in our collection is available there, but a good portion of it is. So for those of you who have asked about how you can find images and where you can find images, that's a great place to start. And as I had mentioned, we will also share out the list of images that we used here today so that you can easily find them. And then there was a question I'll put in the chat, actually, if we'll put into the chat the link to future programs. There was also a question about our upcoming webinars, so we can include that information as well. So let's see if anybody has any other questions. I'm going to give the Q&A box a quick scan to see if there are any other questions that haven't been answered or that we haven't already covered. Feel free to put in your remaining questions. And for those of you who have questions about images, yes, we'll be sharing out that list. And also there were some questions about how can parents build on these strategies, and certainly the resources that museums have on their websites. And it's not just the Getty, but several other museums put their collections online and also put art activities and different curriculum activities tied to their collections. All of that is also available on museums' websites, and teachers can help parents to find those. And we'll send out some links from our website. And there was a question about background images, background information about the images that are on our website. And yes, that is also included. Oh, and then there was one last question about whether, we'll make this the last question, a question about curriculum connections for some of these activities that could tie to mathematics.
Yes. So I was thinking about this during the collaborative drawing. You know, we mentioned drawing a tesseract, a collaborative tesseract. But I also think that you could do some, you know, taking an image from a mathematics book and do a caption this. You know, what is this? You know, in geometry, maybe like, what is this shape? Thinking about this other shape, or really, you know, maybe taking a humorous approach to that. But I think utilizing a collaborative whiteboard or doing the annotate your vote, you know, which, you know, taking some concept from mathematics and saying, you know, which one is right, or which solution is the correct one. Or you could even have students, you know, take turns answering questions on the whiteboard that way.
All right. All right, well, thank you, Darcy, for answering all those questions. I will continue to put into the chat as we're wrapping up a few additional links that might be useful. I just put the link to the upcoming webinars, and we would love to have you sign up for our next webinar in December. We'll be holding these webinars monthly on Wednesdays at 3:30. So we'd love to have you all back for more. We'd also like to thank you all for your participation. We hope that something here was useful, and there's at least one idea that you could take off the shelf from the webinar and try, or otherwise customize it to build on your own curriculum and to work for your individual students. As we mentioned, after the webinar, we'll be sending links to participants that include the slides, as well as the works of art included in the presentation. And we'll also include links to where you can download those images from the Getty's website in case you'd like to put them into your own slideshow or share them on your own. Last but not least, this is the first in our series, and we're getting to know what works for you. So we would really love your feedback and your input as we continue to develop these webinars for the future. So when this webinar comes to an end, you'll get a survey from us, and we hope that you'll take a few minutes to answer our questions to help us continue to improve on what we're doing. So thank you, everybody. We hope that you have a wonderful evening, rest of your afternoon and evening. And we hope to see as many of you as we can on December 16th at our next webinar.